My ex-wife's new husband spent 8 years trying to make me disappear from my daughter's life, without ever technically doing anything I could point to in a courtroom. At her wedding, in a barn on the edge of our little Ohio town, he finally said it out loud. Someone asked who I was, and he said, loud enough for a dozen guests to hear, "Oh, that's just some old guy from her past." I sat down in the back row like he wanted me to. I didn't say a word. Then the pastor stood up, opened the ceremony card, read my name off the reserved seating list, and stopped completely still, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. What happened in the next 2 minutes undid 8 years of that man's quiet campaign in front of every person he'd ever tried to impress. I've run Miller's Hardware on Main Street in Maple Ridge, Ohio, for going on 30 years. It's the kind of store where I still know most customers by name, and where my old Ford pickup's been parked out front so long, people joke it's part of the building. My daughter, Emily, was 11 when her mother, Denise, and I divorced. It was civil, as these things go. No dramatic betrayal, just 2 people who'd grown into different lives. I got every other weekend and Wednesdays, and I never missed one. Not one in 13 years. 2 years after the divorce, Denise married Grant, a commercial real estate developer out of Columbus, who drove an hour and a half each way just to make sure everyone in our small town knew there was money in the family now. Grant was never outright cruel to me. He was something more effective than cruel. He was persistent. Every school play, he made sure to be photographed front and center. Every Friday night football game, he'd show up in a polo with the local team's colors, shaking hands like he was running for mayor. At Emily's high school graduation, he stood up during the backyard reception and gave a speech about watching her grow into a woman, and never once mentioned my name, though I was standing by the grill 8 feet away. I never made a scene about any of it. Emily needed peace more than she needed me keeping score, so I let Grant have his stage every time, and I focused on the version of fatherhood that actually mattered. The 10 p.m. phone calls when she was struggling in college, the drive I made at 2 a.m. when her car broke down 2 states away, the years of being steady when steady was the only thing she needed from me. What Emily's fiancé's family didn't know, and what most of the wedding guests didn't know, was anything about one Tuesday night 21 years earlier. A night I never talked about, not even to Emily. That detail matters in a few minutes. The wedding was out at Willow Creek Barn, the old converted dairy barn everybody around here rents out for weddings now. String lights, mason jars, the whole 9 yards. Grant made sure I understood my place before I'd even parked the truck. The seating chart had me in the 3rd to last row, behind Denise's book club friends, and a table of Grant's business associates from Columbus I'd never met in my life. Meanwhile, the 2 front rows on the aisle were reserved for immediate family, a category Grant had apparently decided didn't include me. I sat where I was told. That's not weakness, by the way. That's a decision. I'd made it years earlier. This day was Emily's, not a stage for my grievances. About 20 minutes before the ceremony, I was standing near the barn doors when I heard Grant's voice carry a little louder than he probably intended. One of the groom's aunts, in from out of state, had apparently pointed in my direction and asked Grant who I was. "Oh," Grant said, with a small laugh, like the question amused him. "That's just some old guy from her past. I want to be honest with you about that moment. It didn't feel like anger. It felt like something closer to exhaustion. 8 years of small erasures finally collected into one sentence, said easily, in passing. like I was a detail not worth explaining to his Columbus friends. I didn't correct him. I didn't say a word. I walked back to my seat in the third to last row, and I sat down. The officiant was Pastor Daniel Reyes, minister over at First Community Church, where the groom's family had gone for years. He had the calm, unhurried presence of a small-town preacher who stood in front of the same pews for both funerals and weddings more times than he can count. Before the processional, it's tradition at a lot of these church-run ceremonies for the officiant to quietly check the reserved seating list, grandparents, honored guests, same as he'd do checking who's up for a hospital visit on Sunday. Most folks never even notice it happens, 30 seconds tops before the music starts. Pastor Reyes ran his finger down the list. I watched him from the third to last row, not expecting anything at all. His finger stopped on my name. He read it again, slower, mouthing it silently to himself. He looked up, scanned the barn, found me in the back, out of place among Grant's Columbus crowd in their sport coats, and his face changed. The color actually left it for a second, like a man staring at something he'd spent 20 years hoping to see again. Pastor Reyes asked the wedding coordinator for one moment before the processional began. Guests shifted in the folding chairs, confused. Grant, seated in the front row playing the role of proud father, turned around to see what the holdup was. The pastor walked down the center aisle, past the front rows, past Grant, straight to the back of the barn, and stopped in front of me. "It's you," he said, his voice unsteady. "After 21 years, it's actually you. I want to take you back to a night most folks in that barn had never heard about, because I'd never told it to anyone outside my own house. 21 years earlier, I lived in a 4-unit apartment building just off Route 9, back before I bought the hardware store. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the smell of smoke and a woman screaming from the floor below. I didn't think twice. I ran downstairs in bare feet, kicked in a jammed door thick with smoke, and found a young man, no older than 25, trying to shield his wife and their newborn daughter from the heat coming down the hallway. The stairwell behind them was already gone. I got the baby out through a window onto the fire escape first, then went back for his wife, then went back one more time for him, because he wouldn't leave without knowing they were both safe first. By the time the volunteer fire department got there, I had already carried all 3 of them clear down the block. Somebody's neighbor threw a blanket around my shoulders. I never gave anybody my full name. Told the fire captain I just lived upstairs, had to open the hardware store in a few hours, and headed home to change. I moved out of that building within the month. Never thought twice about it as something worth being found for. "That baby is my daughter," Pastor Reyes said, turning to face the whole barn. 200 folding chairs full of guests, the bride's family, the groom's family. Grant sitting frozen in the front row in his tailored suit. "She's 21 years old now. She's standing behind me right now as a bridesmaid. I have spent 2 decades praying I'd get one chance to thank the man who climbed back into a burning building 3 separate times for a family he'd never even met. And I just found him sitting in the back row, being introduced to a stranger as some old guy from her past. I looked past him and found Emily standing at the back of the barn in her dress, hand over her mouth, tears already falling. Because in 26 years, I had never once told her that part of my life. It never seemed like the kind of thing you bring up over Sunday dinner. Grant sat frozen in the front row, the same man who 10 minutes earlier had introduced me to a stranger as
some old guy from her past. Now watching 200 people turn to look at exactly who that old guy actually was. The ceremony continued a few minutes later, but something in that barn had permanently shifted. When Pastor Reyes reached the old line in the service, "Who presents this woman to be married?" Grant started to rise out of his seat like he'd rehearsed it. Pastor Reyes looked past him, straight to the back row, and simply said, "I believe her father's already on his way up." Emily met me halfway down the aisle and looped her arm through mine the rest of the way, tears streaking clean lines through her makeup, and gave me away herself. At the reception, under the string lights, Emily found me before our dance and asked why I'd never told her. I told her the truth, that I didn't run into that building thinking I'd have a story to tell one day. I did it because it was 2 a.m. and a family needed somebody to not think it over first. That's not a performance. That's just what you do. Pastor Reyes's daughter, the baby I'd carried out that fire escape 21 years earlier, now standing 3 feet from me in a bridesmaid dress, hugged me for a long time before she could say anything at all. Grant and I haven't spoken much since the wedding. I'm not interested in a rivalry with him, and I never was. I only ever wanted to be present for my daughter, quietly, the way I'd been doing it for 26 years, before anyone in that barn knew my name meant a thing.
What I learned that day is something I already half knew. The folks who need to announce their importance in a room are usually the ones least sure of it. And the ones who've actually done something that mattered rarely bring it up, because they were never doing it to be seen. They were doing it because somebody needed them. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who never had to earn the confidence they carried, know that the truth doesn't need your help finding the room. Sometimes it walks in on its own, at exactly the right moment, and says your name louder than anyone expected. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about quiet folks who turn out to be the strongest ones in the room, subscribe, because this won't be the last wedding where the truth showed up uninvited.